Good evening, everybody. I've started recording, and a very special good evening to Evangelos Roumeliotis, who seems to be the primary person who comments on our YouTube videos. So I wanted to give you a shout out. I don't know who you are, but I'm grateful for your patronage. And we are going to be continuing in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15. We're going to pick up at verse 21. But before we get into everything, I did want to do something that I'd been meaning to do for a while, and I've been talking about verbally without the use of visual aid. But I said I might as well just, print out a map. So I printed out a map of the Holy Land in the time of Jesus. I hope can you guys see it clearly in the video, or is it backwards? Are the words backwards? This is supposed to read Judea. Can you read that, or is it backwards? Don't everyone answer at once.
I can read it.
Okay, you can read it? Okay, good. Just because it's reversed for me, but I think they have technology now. So, okay, this is, I just wanted to point out a few things that kind of help set the stage. This is, a map of Israel, Palestine in the time of Jesus Christ, and hopefully, you're familiar with where this is at. This is on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea. And so this is the Mediterranean Sea right here. This is the coastline. This is, historic Gaza is in the same place where modern day Gaza is. And it's, the interior of, like, Israel goes from here. For Israel is, if you've ever heard the slogan, from the river to the sea. What they're referring to is, the borders of modern day Israel / historic Palestine extend from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. So this is kind of like the boundary of the Holy Land. It kind of works from the north to the south too. Not perfectly, not exactly, but this is, the northernmost area. This is the southernmost area of Israel of historic Israel Palestine. And so we've said that that Jerusalem, the capital of the Hebrew world, is down here. And we said that everything in Jesus's ministry has been up here in Galilee. So that's actually a good distance, if you can tell. So Jerusalem's down here. Jesus's kind of home base where he does a lot of ministries, all the way up here in Capernaum. So this is what we said, that Jesus is kind of in the sticks as far as the map, as far as ancient Israelites were concerned. And as far as the Roman Empire is concerned, this is already the sticks, because Rome is hundreds of miles that way, and we're just out in the boonies right now. Nevertheless, spiritually, this is the most important place on earth. So Jerusalem's down here, and this is the Sea of Galilee. So whenever you see Jesus, he gets on a boat or he travels across water, pretty much it's always on this, rather small body of water. It's not huge. On a clear day, at least from many parts of it, you can see the other side. But this is where all the action is. And you can see, so there's Bethsaida or Bethesda, there's Capernaum, there's Tiberias, there's Nazareth, where Jesus was raised. There's Cana, where there was the famous, wedding at Cana. And so familiarize. It's helpful to familiarize yourself with these things. Sorry, I have to admit some people online. Welcome, Marshall. Welcome, Sonny. I was just giving people a tour of ancient Israel, Palestine. I won't go back over anything, but but basically most of the action of the gospel is happening up here in Galilee, and it's only, primarily just the last 6 days of Jesus's life, which take place down here in Judea. There's no specific point I want to make about that, but I'm just getting you familiar because I find it very helpful. It helps me understand things a lot more because you're reading a lot of Jesus went from here to there and did this or that. And this visualizing it a little bit helps. So yeah, it's good. If you have one of those nice Bibles that has a map in the back, does the Orthodox Study Bible have a map in the back? I think it does. Yeah. So familiarize yourself with it. If you want to, again, it's all about just like the more, obviously, you guys, most of you don't have the leisure to study the Bible like it for the amount of time I do. But it just contributes to your understanding of what's going on. The more information you can get about, the historic context of everything you're reading about, the more just like rounded out your picture of it feels. Okay, that's that. I just wanted to familiarize yourselves, you guys, with it a little bit. Okay, so now we are going. We just finished Jesus's discourse where he got in a fight with the Pharisees because the Pharisees were asking why Jesus' disciples didn't wash their hands before eating. And remember, this was not washing your hands for hygiene reasons. This was sort of a ritual purification. We explained the reasons for that, and why it was a pious but incorrect practice that arose among the Jews in Jesus' day. And Jesus said, "It's more what's more important is the content of a person's heart. What's the content of a person's heart?" And we said, biblically, the heart is the seat of the thoughts, the seat of cognition. We said that it lends itself to some really interesting possible conclusions about the nature of the human soul, but that's for a different day. That's in the previous video. But so that's where we're at. So I just want it to be in your mind when we're about to read what we just read, that the things that Jesus just did in the previous reading were that he said it's not food that defiles a person, but it's the content of his heart that defiles a person. Jesus said it's not food that defiles a person, but the content of his heart that defiles a person. That's relevant thematically for what we're about to get into. Okay, any questions about the previous first half of Matthew 15 before we jump right in? Okay, so now we're in the, there's a subheading that's, or a Gentile with great faith, I think it says in your Orthodox Study Bible, a Gentile shows her faith. Yeah, verse 21. Then Jesus went out from there and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, saying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David, my daughter is severely demon-possessed." But he answered her not a word. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she cries out after us." But he answered and said, "I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Then she came and worshipped him and said, "Lord, help me." But he answered and said, "It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." And she said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered and said to her, "O woman, great is your faith, let it be to you as you desire." And her daughter was healed from that very hour. Now, first I want to talk about, so what's going on here? So Jesus is departing, and this is another reason I wanted the map. We said Jesus is spending most of his time around in the immediate vicinity of the Sea of Galilee. Now he's moving on actually up past here. So in a place the map cuts off. So he's actually going far away. And if you read the parallel passage in the Gospel of Mark, that's why it's helpful to have the multiple biblical references, it actually tells us that he's going to the land of he's going to the land of, first of all, he's going to the land of the Gentiles. He's leaving the traditional Israelite homeland. And he's going to a place that the Gentiles, the Jews of the time, would, consider unclean. So that's noteworthy in and of itself. Why? Because it's inhabited by pagan Gentiles. It's inhabited. But there's also a historic connection there, because actually Tyre, the land of Tyre was allied with David and Solomon's kingdom, and actually they had a positive relationship. But that's neither here nor there. Basically, Jesus is in the middle of his ministry. He's going there, according to the Gospel of Mark, for some R&R. For some rest and relaxation, to help his disciples rest. A Canaanite woman comes out, and in the Gospel of Mark, I think when it talks about this, it calls her a Syrophoenician woman. Same diff. Basically, a woman from that region who is not a Jew. She's a Canaanite. Actually, a Canaanite, was one of the people groups that the Israelites were ordered in the Old Testament to eradicate from the Promised Land. So, not only is she not a Jew, but actually she's a member of a people group that is the ancient enemy of the Jews. So what could be worse than that, right? And she begs Jesus to heal her daughter who's demon possessed. And we said, remember, in ancient times, and of course in the modern day to a much lesser degree, but still a real phenomenon. But in ancient times, demon possession was a real phenomenon. It's not the same as mental illness. Some people go back and read this and think, oh, they were stupid back then and they thought all mental illness was demonic. No, it's not. It was a distinct issue, and people had it, and not just Jews had it, but people across the ancient world dealt with it. And that's one of the reasons Jesus, and not just Jesus, but actually Christianity later became popular, was that it proved efficacious in dealing with the problem of demon possession. You know, if you read on the Incarnation by Saint Athanasius, 300 years after Christ, he talks about, go out and test for yourself. The sign of the cross drives away witchcraft and magic and demons, and that's why we're gaining so many converts all over the world. So it wasn't just a theoretical thing; it was a very real thing. It was a very real problem that these people had that they wanted solved. But anyway, Jesus doesn't answer her, doesn't respond to her, and then actually, when she begs him, he says, "I'm just here for the Israelites. You're not one of the people I'm here to help." And it was only after he even compares her to dogs. He said it's not good to take the children's bread and to throw it to dogs. And it's only after she humbles herself to the point of saying, of referring to herself as a little dog, basically saying, "Yes, Lord, I am a dog. Please heal me still, heal my daughter still," that he says, "Oh woman, great is your faith." Now, I wanted to just describe it overall because I want to say, and this is actually something that was really interesting for me to think about for this Bible study. This is one of the most controversial things Jesus does in the Gospels, especially to modern people. If there's something people are offended about in Jesus' life, or they say, "Wow, that's something Jesus did that looks kind of bad," this is that episode. I was watching a YouTube, very, very strange thing, but we're living in the 21st century. So it was AIs, multiple different AIs debating. Have you ever seen this? AIs debate each other. It was multiple different AIs debating the legacies, who was better, who was worse, Jesus, Buddha, or Muhammad, going through their lives. And it seems like a very silly thing, but actually it's actually really interesting. But anyway, when it was like so-called, digging up the dirt on each of these great religious figures, this was the number one thing that came up for Jesus. Obviously we believe he's the Son of God, so we believe that this was not even a sin for him. But I just wanted to put this in the context of, if this is the worst thing Jesus does in his entire recorded life, it's actually a pretty good life. And I've always believed that we as Christians I always believed that Jesus had a perfect life because, we're Christians. We're supposed to believe that, right? And that's what the church teaches. But then if you actually go through the evidence, and you just read what all's in the Gospels, you realize, oh, he really does a lot of good things and really not a lot of controversial things at all. Like, if this is the worst charge you can bring against him, that was a pretty good candidate for a human being who lived a perfect life. And then watching this AI YouTube debate, it was a little silly, but it was dealing with real historical material. Buddha, for the most part, was a nice guy. His big controversial thing was that he abandoned his wife and son in order to find enlightenment. And then they got to Muhammad and like, oh my goodness, okay, there's just, that's a can of worms. Yeah, there's but it's very interesting. So if you have to go for a candidate if you have to say, oh, is there one person, who we have records of who lived a perfect life? I think Jesus is a pretty darn good candidate. But anyway, so I just wanted to put that in the overall context of his life. Now, I obviously don't believe that he was sinning or doing anything wrong in any way here, because he's the Son of God, but he was doing this for his own purpose. But it was really interesting. So it's a woman of Canaan from that region. So he's going to be among the Gentiles. And we said in the Gospel of Mark chapter 7, I believe, it talks about how he's going to get rest. He's constantly mobbed by people. His disciples are, doing a lot of work for him and helping him in his ministry and crowd control and, bearing heavy loads and stuff. So it was actually, so the Father's commenting on this based on what it says in this passage in the Gospel of Mark. He was going there for rest, but he was doing it primarily for his disciples. He wanted to rest them because they, had been very busy and active, traveling long distances, not eating and drinking a whole lot, dealing with large crowds of people day and night, and he wanted to show mercy to them. So I think that helps contextualize the fact that if you do interpret this as a perhaps somewhat abrupt response to the Canaanite woman, well, he's not. It's not that she came to him out of a crowd of people and he's trying to turn her away, but he's specifically trying to rest, and he's trying to let his disciples rest. And this woman, understandably, but doesn't even want to give him a moment of peace during that time. But I think that contextualizes a lot. It wasn't just him being rough with her for no reason, but there was a specific context that she was disrupting his rest. So he is also concerned about his disciples. So he's going into, but like we said, he's in Tyre and Sidon. This is Gentile territory. He's left Israel. And this is significant in and of itself. Remember, there's symbolic meaning in everything in the Bible, and obviously all commentators and interpreters believe that. But even the Bible itself, tells you that the Bible is saturated with hidden meaning. It does, especially in places like when Jesus explains his parables to his disciples. He's telling them flat out, the words I say have deeper meaning than just the surface. The book of Revelation is full of it. It's full of these big symbolic images, and then someone interpreting the images, someone explaining the images. So everything, even though this is historical, it is literally historically true that Jesus went to Tyre and Sidon. It's also symbolic of something. The fact that Jesus Christ, the Son of God himself, is leaving Israel and going into Gentile territory is a sign that the covenant, God's relationship is going to be extended from just the Israelites to all of mankind. So he left the unbelieving Jews. Remember, he was just leaving the Pharisees, who basically were rejecting him, in the process of rejecting him. So he's just getting in a fight with the Pharisees from Jerusalem, and then immediately after, he fails to convert them, he's going to Tyre and Sidon to the Gentiles. So that follows kind of the arc of Jesus's ministry. This is a microcosm of what Jesus does on a larger scale. And so she comes to him with a request, Lord Jesus, Son of David, have mercy. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. Remember, Son of David is a messianic title. The daughter of Canaan, the fathers, when they read this passage, the daughter of a woman of Canaan, the daughter of Canaan is a representation of all Gentiles, right? So Jesus is going to heal this young woman, but in that it's represented the fact that Christ has come for all Gentiles, not just this specific woman. But he answered her not a word on her immediate request. He just remains silent and doesn't even address her. Jesus is testing her, obviously. He's trying to bring her to a point where she's going to display that faith and humility. And remember, this kind of stuff, every interaction Jesus has with a person in the Bible is an interaction a human being has with God in our own real lives. So she asks him this very understandable request, and he's silent to her. That is the experience of a lot of us many times. We come to God with something specific and something good. It's not bad for her to want her her daughter to be healed, but he's silent, and he has his purposes. He's in this specific case, he's testing her. He wants to see what she's made of. He wants her to show her faith and her humility. And that's an example for us. Sometimes we come to God with a request that's not at all sinful and completely legitimate, and God is silent. Now, sometimes he remains silent, but other times he is testing us by his silence. He wants to see us persist in our faith. So even in the Bible, all throughout the Bible, the Bible is not a record of people praying and getting instant results. But many, many places in the Bible, people pray and pray and pray and don't get what they asked until they've prayed many times for it. God wants to see us persist in prayer. And of course, sometimes God does not answer our prayers positively for his own reasons. But the silence of Jesus is significant here. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, send her away, for she cries out, ask for us. So the disciples, i.e. the church, because the disciples represent the church, because the church, is going to end up being the bishops who are, ordained by the disciples, want to send her away. And so actually, when I read this, it sounds like the disciples are trying to get rid of her. And so I got a lesson out of that, which is sometimes, the leaders of the church are a barrier to the church, are a barrier to Christ. It's unfortunate, and by the way, that's important, because even though the disciples can sometimes be problematic, Christ doesn't get rid of the institution of the church, right? It's because some people have a terrible experience with the priest, they have a terrible experience with the bishop, and they say, okay, well, the church is good for nothing. No, Jesus sees that, these are flawed human vessels, and he sees that sometimes they bar the way from him, but he still chooses to dispense his economy, his mercy, through the church. So bad bishops, bad priests, bad leaders of the church, they're a traumatic thing, and they harm our relationship with God, but they're not an excuse. The church is still the vehicle of God's grace, even despite them. And I think that's part of God's test for us. It's part of his test for them too, because he wants to save their souls as well. But actually, what's kind of interesting, and this sometimes happens, the fathers read this, like multiple different fathers in commenting on this passage, actually see this as the disciples having pity on her. What they mean, according to this reading, is the daughters are asking to heal her daughter and thereby to send her away, because they know Jesus can do it. So it's interesting. Is this the disciples having pity on her, or if this is the disciples trying to get rid of her? I don't know. A surface reading seems to me that they're trying to get rid of her, but other commentators, much wiser than I, say that this is actually the disciples having pity. Either way, it's there's some ambiguities in the scriptures, and either reading you can get a lesson out of. Either reading you can learn from. But he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And this is true. Right? Jesus does come to embrace the non-Jews. He does come to embrace the Gentiles, but only in a big way after what?
Crucifixion.
After the crucifixion, and then after
Right.
Pentecost, what we just celebrated. The big full throttle ministry to the Gentiles doesn't happen until 10 days after Jesus is in heaven. During his entire time on earth, when he's ministering, he's not exclusively, but primarily focused on the Jews. And that, what is up with that? Why couldn't he throw the Gentiles more of a bone while he was here on earth? And that's because God made a covenant with Israel in the Old Testament. God, said that the people of Israel would have a special relationship with him in the Old Testament. And what this is showing is that God takes that very seriously. Even though they're faithless, he is faithful. Jesus Christ, in coming to the earth, is continuing to honor God, the covenant that he made with the Israelites. And it's only after they reject him fully and finally on the cross and they shout out, "We have no king but Caesar," that he kind of lets that covenant drop. But it's to give us and them no excuse and say, oh yeah, God did the Old Testament stuff, but then he just kind of abandoned his people. No, he was faithful with them all the way. It was only when they fully and ultimately chose to reject him that he opened things up in a certain way. Nectarius has a question, then Marshall.
Well, if you think about it, how can a covenant end except if at least one of the parties dies? You had a whole history of prophet, them murdering the prophets and whatnot, and rejecting God each and every way with these idols. But it's when he actually comes in the flesh and they kill him, like they kill God.
Wow.
They kill the one party that was holding up the covenant. Pretty much brings a necessary end to the covenant.
That's a really, really good insight. That's a really good insight, and that's because a covenant. And by the way, what we say a covenant, God had a covenant with Israel. Basically, what we mean is like a contract. In modern terms. And I don't like to use that word because it sounds too businessy and too bureaucratic, but it's the same kind of idea, right? A contract is I promise X, Y, and Z, and in return you promise A, B, and C. And so God had a contract with Israel. When does a contract become void? When someone dies. And in the crucifixion of Christ, it was the physical death of Christ, but it was the spiritual death of old Israel. So that is enough to void a contract. So that's really interesting. Marshall had a question, then Esther.
Could it be that the people of Israel, even the Samaritans, were semi-primed, like in a mental sense, to speaking of the Old Testament, things like these things have value, these things don't have value. You need to respect these types of people, like in a mental sense, for Christ's limited time on earth to make the best use of it.
Yeah, and that's what we see. The whole history of Israel was a preparation for them to receive Christ. Only a fraction of them did, but the original church was, all the disciples were Jews. The Mother of God, obviously the supreme example, was a Jew. The first Christians were primarily Jews. So even though the larger body of Israel rejected Christ, it was not for nothing, right? It was not a total failure. There was a huge chunk of the ancient Jews who were ready to receive Christ and who did, and who gave us, our faith. Esther, had you had a question before? Okay. Yes, Dawn.
I have a question about the demon possession.
Yes.
How can you know today if someone's demon possessed or has mental illness?
That's a great question. And I was in our pastoral care class when I was in seminary. We did a talk in one class with a priest who had done exorcisms and told us how to deal with that, basically. And the first thing he said is that, and this I've heard now from other things when just reading about Catholic exorcists, they'd say the same thing. First of all, demon possession is extremely rare, at least in modern secular America. Apparently, happens much more frequently in, like, Africa and Southeast Asia, where people are more directly involved with witchcraft and ancient stuff. But generally, by default, assume it's not demon possession. What would make you assume? What would make you believe it's demon possession is if they go to a doctor and a psychiatrist who says, and we as priests are supposed to work with actual IRL medical professionals, and it's only when the doctor says, I have no explanation for these symptoms, I throw my hands up, this doesn't look like anything I was ever trained in, that's when we can start to say, okay, maybe there's a demon involved. But usually there would be specific, like, telltale signs, right? Like a person who's possessed would apparently, not that I've ever dealt with a possessed person that I've known about, but what you would expect is that they have a really powerful aversion to holy things, right? Like St. Paisios, apparently, he would test a person who claimed possession to him. He'd come to them and hold out two hands, and he wouldn't tell them what was in them or why he was doing it or anything. But in one hand he'd hold a cross, in the other hand he'd have nothing. And if they gave some indication that they were afraid of or harmed by the hand that was hiding a cross, then he'd say, okay, this person is possibly or likely demon possessed. So the big symptom, someone who has paranoid schizophrenia, they might have some religious delusions, but they're not going to necessarily flee in terror from a tiny little cross the same way, especially one they can't see or have no earthly knowledge of. Esther?
I will say that, especially in America, there's not really a need for demon possession. We do it to ourselves. We get so comfortable in our little spaces. The devil doesn't have to try. We're already sitting in his lap.
There's something definitely to be said to the fact that we very willfully surrender to a lot of temptations.
You went out, you worked fields, you did hard things. We don't do nearly as hard a work now. We do mentally, like, don't get me wrong, I'm also exhausted after work. But before, we had much more grounded connection than we do now.
Yeah, we are living radically different lifestyles than people even 200 years ago. Sometimes we lose that perspective that we really are dealing with, it's almost like, sometimes it feels like dealing with people from another planet, reading about the past. Marshall, did you mean to have your hand up? Did you have something else to say, or did you just leave it up from before?
Oh, yeah. Shoot, I forgot to take it down.
Okay, Chris?
I don't remember where I read this quote ever, but something who it was. But I remember reading something along the lines of, like, one of the devil's greatest tricks was convincing everybody he doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I think that's very true today.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. And it's very interesting. There's a very strange phenomenon that people, for some reason, consider belief in God pretty much normal. Most Americans, even intelligent, educated ones, believe in God or something like God today. But very many of them will treat belief in the devil as some kind of outlandish superstition. And it's like, why the difference? We're both believing in supernatural, intelligent entities. Why is the one so why is the one so acceptable but the other so strange? Well, I think that's, the devil's deceit, right? Yes, Esther?
Two things. Belief in God, like we believe in God in practice. Most people are going to call you crazy or some kind of radicalist of some nature. So our kind of belief in God is crazy to them.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense, especially if you go back and look at everything. But they still think we're insane.
That's true. That is a fair point.
And a lot of the mental illnesses are actually linked to what we're doing in our daily lives. Like, social media, paranoid schizophrenia. There you go. It's sitting right there. It's been linked multiple times throughout since we developed Google.
Yeah,
That
a lot
our mental illness is tanking with the progression of technology.
Yeah, mental illness and social media use. It's actually the subject of a book I really promote to people, which is called The Anxious Generation. Certain mental illnesses, anxiety and depression, are very much linked to social media usage. Absolutely. One big one that I've noticed, again, like a lot of, I think I read before, something like, 50% of American adults have consumed marijuana at least once in their adult life. That is a very believable statistic to me. And most people get away with it fine. But I've met a lot. Because I just doing what I do, I interact with more paranoid schizophrenics than probably the rest of you. I've met more than it feels like more than a handful of people who said, like, I tried a pot brownie once when I was 18. It just absolutely shattered my brain. Like, I think the vast majority of people, like, it doesn't have the same effect. But there's some people who even relatively, like, not considered hard drugs actually have a huge mental toll on it. And I think this is not, like, well acknowledged, but very real phenomenon. Anyway, we're far afield. Okay. So he said to them, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then she came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. So I worshipped him according to, if you read the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7, verse 25, which is a parallel, it's the same account, just told through different eyes. And that's why it's helpful to have these side by side, to get, literally said she fell down before him. What is this? This is a prostration. Prostrations, again, Esther's talking about things that, we do in the Orthodox Church that other people think are weird or abnormal or something, like prostration. And the worst thing in the world that drives me nuts is people associate, people in the West primarily associate prostrations. What is a prostration? And by the way, for those of you who don't know, that's when you make the sign of the cross and fall down on your face, as a movement, an act of worship, an act of veneration. People in the West primarily associate that gesture with Islam, and that drives me nuts because we were doing it before, 600 years before the Prophet Muhammad was born. I know they got it from us. They praying to the East, they got it from us. We did it first. So, but now, yeah. Anyway,
we could do like not quite the 5 times a day thing, whatever. We have like prayers of the hours too.
We have prayers.
A lot of people, especially with prayer of the hours, assume I'm Islamic, and I'm like, no. Yeah. No.
And head coverings. Most Christian, like traditional Christian, most Christian women in most countries used to cover their hair. Not hijabs, not the whole face, not or burqas or whatever, not the full face covering. That was never ever part of Christianity.
No.
But if you look at the traditional costumes of most Christian countries, most women wore head coverings, and it's only in the last 1 to 200 years. So we're talking even like France and England, places you don't in your mind might not associate. Most Christian women were wearing head coverings most of the time. Anyway,
think of that medieval peasant look.
Yeah, exactly. If you imagine a medieval peasant, what do they look? What does the woman look like? She's, wearing a head cover. Well, it was, Christian culture. Yes.
Now, when did back to Judaism? When were yarmulkes actually considered symbols of Judaism? Around which century did yarmulkes come into Judaism?
That is a fascinating question that I do not know the answer to. I'll just lay it on the line. I do not know, but I would like to know.
Because it's very common in Jewish traditions that yarmulkes are very common.
Yeah.
In almost 99.9% of Israel, what I remember.
Yeah, all Orthodox and I think most conservative Jewish males, it's a male thing.
Interesting.
Where yarmulkes, Jewish women actually cover their heads, even Orthodox ones. The reason you might not know it is that they do something that Christians and Muslims never did, which is that they accept wigs as a form of head covering.
Interesting.
So I spent part of my life growing up in Baltimore in a very Jewish neighborhood, with a lot of Orthodox Jews around, and you'd go out, you'd see the women who do not appear to have head coverings necessarily, but actually they're wigs. That is something that Christians and Muslims never done. Always had the women hair cut. Anyway, it's neither here nor there really. It's very interesting to think or learn about. But anyway, so the Canaanite woman came before Jesus and made a prostration to him. You know, if people say all kinds of things, you know, oh, is the Orthodox Church biblical? Is it based on, yes, everything like arises from the Bible. Anyway, but he answered and said, it is not good to take children's bread and throw it to little dogs. So first God ignores her, and then he appears to insult her, right? So think of this in context of your own spiritual life. I mean, treading somewhat lightly, but I mean, I think all of us, you know, it's a misinterpretation, but all of us have had experiences maybe in our lives where we felt like we've been insulted by God. Again, not that that's a right interpretation, but it's a common thing we feel, I think, where it, not only God, did you not give me what I wanted, you did not answer my prayer, but you've made things worse for me. We've definitely felt that way before, and yet she persists in her prayer, and that's and she uses an opportunity for humility to lower herself. That's what Jesus commends her for, is that she is willing to accept his quote unquote insult of calling her a little dog. That's literally what kinaris in Greek means.
Yeah, Paul was telling me that like could be like puppy as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, I don't know if that.
So yeah, it's
Anything,
so
but, yeah.
so to be fair, yes, my understanding of reading this word is that it's a house dog, it's a pet, it's not a filthy street animal. So there is a little, it's a little nicer than calling someone like a, you know, like a mangy stray or something.
Yeah.
But it's still lower, inferior. Yeah.
Were dogs like considered unclean in Judaism in the same way of like pigs or anything?
It's a good question. You certainly wouldn't eat dog meat, but because they're carnivorous. But
Right.
were they unclean? I actually don't remember the clean unclean laws well enough to rule on that.
I think if they kept kosher, then yes, they would absolutely not be allowed in some parts. Like some parts of Judaism, I think it depends on the traditions, but if it was like different type of Judaism, then no, it would not be allowed. It'd be considered unclean.
I suspect that's true. I'm not positive. But yeah. But either way, wealthy people, Jews or Romans or whatever, would keep, you know, pet lap dogs or whatever. So it was a phenomenon people would have been familiar with, even if it was not considered good for Jews.
It might also be pointing out that it's not like, because it's the same word for puppy, it's not like a work dog that's valuable.
Huh,
work
interesting.
dogs are incredibly valuable, and were even more valuable back then, especially herding sheep.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
It is interesting to bring that back in the conversation, just because of what I've reminded people of again and again, which is that Jesus is speaking primarily to an agrarian audience, primarily to people who grow, who farm, or are connected to farmers. Anyway, so and she said, yeah.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I'm behind. So like if you were to say like not good to give it to the puppies, that kind of has like the immature tone to it. Does the Greek hold that, or like does it mean like spiritually immature?
I did not necessarily. Again, I'm not an expert on this word kinarius. I just read the dictionary definition of it, which is that I didn't get the sense of necessarily immature, like baby dog. I got the sense of small dog, but it didn't say anything about full grown versus not full grown.
Okay.
But a house dog. So it could be a pup. It could be a Labrador puppy. It could be a full grown Chihuahua. I don't know.
I think it's like a good thing. It's two different ways to read it, two different interpretations, two different lessons.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. You can get and it's really interesting. If you're wondering why I'm saying that, I mean, can you read the same scripture in two opposite ways? Yes, the fathers do that. I don't want to give specifics, but I was reading something specific about that, just because I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but reading something in the book of Revelation where St. Andrew of Caesarea was commenting on it, the word morning star. And he says the word morning star in Revelation, it can refer both to Satan and to Christ. Don't be scandalized that the one word in the one passage can have two directly opposite meanings, because it expands. So the fathers viewed the scripture as something extraordinarily deep, as long as you can get a meaning out of it without torturing the text to death, You know, I mean, there's a funny line I read in statistics. You know, if you torture the numbers enough, they'll confess to anything. You know, and the same thing is true with the Bible. You can torture it enough, but that it can say all kinds of things. But I think there are, within reasonable textual interpretation, you can still get a range of possible things. So it is possible to take that too far. You know, the Bible can't teach you. You know, you can't draw infinite, or you can draw infinite lessons. You can't make it say just anything. But there's still a range. Anyway. But yeah, so she says, "Yes, Lord, even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall to their master's table." So she takes it, you know, what appears to be an insult, just completely in her stride, and she says, "Yes, I am a dog. I please heal my daughter anyway." And that shows a lot of things. And she which fall from their master's table. So not only that she calls herself a dog, but she calls Jesus, and not just Jesus, but all the Jews. I mean, she's saying all the Jews are my masters, all the Jews are above me, you know, at least as far as this metaphor goes. That's how she's lowering herself. That's extreme humility. And it's contrast to Jesus's, you know, Jesus sometimes butts heads with the Pharisees. Or you know, you get that in the gospel, and they say, you know, we have Abraham as our father. You know, they're very, very proud of their pedigree. And then, you know, Jesus, you know, hashes it out with them very bad. This woman lowers herself, and Jesus, you know, just pours praise on her. So that is an example of our own spiritual life. You know, what orientation or attitude should we bring to Jesus? Should we bring it that we're the children of Abraham, or that we're little dogs? Well, one prayer got answers, the other didn't. Yes, Grace, you were going to say something?
According to the internet, dogs are unclean.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So yes, it's an even worse. It is a worse insult. Okay. So she was trying to get. So she's content, not, you know, not even to, you know, what is the children's bread here? What are the crumbs here? What's, you know, God's grace, God's mercy, this gift of healing. And she says, I don't even need the full bread. I just need a little crumb. I'll take a little crumb, and that'll be enough. You know, it reminds me of a holy elder who said, you know, I just want a little corner of paradise, little small tiny plot of land, long enough for me to lie down in, and that's enough. That's all I. Obviously, you know, there's a bit of a joke there, but it's also sincere at the same time. You know, we ask God for just something very, very, very small, but He gives us so much in exchange. So she was, and notice also she was asking. So another thing to point out was she was probably, you know, not certain, but she was probably asking Jesus to come with her to her house. She probably lived at some distance, and that's also probably why Jesus was reluctant to help her with his disciples. She was probably expecting him to make a trip or something, and that's why you know, it would have interfered with their rest so much. And yet instead she receives the crumb of healing at a distance. So Jesus doesn't come, but he gives her something even better, which is just the instant on-demand healing. And Jesus answered, said, "O woman, great is her faith. Let it be to you as you desire." And her daughter was healed from that very hour. Great faith. In this is so. If Jesus says, "O woman, great is your faith," we need to pay attention. What does Jesus consider great faith? Great faith is inextricably linked with humility. There, you know, you look around at churches, you look around within the church herself, even leaders of the church, you see people, well, they believe in God, they pray so much. If they do not have humility, if I lack humility, and I do lack humility, Lord, forgive me, then our faith is at very least very deficient. Because Jesus is saying right here that real faith, really great faith, is faith that's extremely humble. And insofar as we're lacking that, we can say we believe in God, we can make long prayers, we can make tons of prostrations. There's something about deficient, something incomplete, something false about our faith if we do not couple it with humility. And that's important for people to recognize, because so many people get turned off by faith because they look around. And Christians, they look at Christians, they say, well, these people supposedly have all this faith and they're a bunch of hypocrites. And it's like, yeah, that's a fair criticism. But you should know that Jesus doesn't consider it faith, at least not full faith, at least not faith in the realest, fullest sense. Yes.
Her faith was also great enough that he didn't develop that as long as her faith was strong enough, her daughter would make it by the time she got back, like he did with the man who ran 25 miles, I think.
Wow. Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. So let it be to you as you desire. So she just trusted that she was going to go home and everything would be all right. She didn't have confirmation. She was probably a good distance away, like we said. That's a very interesting point. But notice that the whole process. Oh, yes, Dawn.
About humility. Before being Orthodox, I noticed that Christians, the churches I went to, it was more of a giving God a list
Mm-hmm.
of what you want him to do.
Mm-hmm.
There was no humility.
Oh, we do that here. Don't worry. Yeah, yeah. I'm just saying. I'm gonna say. You know, whatever. I just want to get it out of the way. Always, of course, that whatever problems you've seen in other churches, you will find them in the Orthodox Church. You will find the insincerity. You'll find the hypocrisy. You'll find, you know, you name it. We got it, baby. But it's the most important thing is that Christ is here, the Holy Spirit is here, and the saints are here. And that's, you know, don't look at the bad examples. Look at the, you know, the 1 in a million, you know, elder friends we have, the 1 in a million Saint Matrona of Moscow we have, and that makes it all worth it. But
I have noticed you are more humble here. I want to be positive. I'm learning a lot about how to be humble, how to pray with humility, how to make requests and not demand.
Well, that's good. We're all learning together. Yes.
I have noticed or at least in the churches I've been to, tend to be more honest in our faith and less, I'm gonna call it false, because honestly, that's exactly what it comes off as, than a lot of the other places I've been. I've been to many churches.
Well, I will say one thing, again, not having had a ton of experience outside of the Orthodox Church, you know, I'm from a Greek family. I will say that there's, what's always drawn me to our faith is that there's a tremendous amount of authenticity, especially among, you know, the handful of like genuinely holy people or people I believe I've met. I've very powerfully gotten the sense that they're 100% sincere and not faking it in any way. They're just living life in the Spirit. And that is, for me, is powerfully attractive. And that there's something, you know, qualitatively different, it seems to me, than, because you know, even sometimes I feel like I'm just putting on a show, you know, in my vanity, in my egotism or whatever. Marshall, yes.
So like on the topic of prostrations, could it be that there's some sort of like culling, like I don't want to say culling, but in the Orthodox Church there is prostrations. I mean, that's a very humbling thing to do in public. Like I don't know.
Yeah, it's humbling to prostrate yourself in church. One thing we do that I got from my friends who got it from the monasteries is sometimes if you had a really bad fight with someone, I've done it, you know, to my wife before. You walk up to them, you fall on your face, and you make a prostration to them and say, "Forgive me." It's hard because it's a really kind of humiliating gesture to put yourself in, and you don't usually, you know, I mean, the monks and nuns will do it to each other, you know, all the time. You know, we as lay Orthodox Christians probably shouldn't do it that much, but if you've really crossed the line, you've really done something wrong, that's actually a great way to physically, visibly humble yourself. And do you look like an idiot doing it? Yeah, you do, and that's kind of the point. You know, you look like a weirdo, but you're supposed to not, you know. Anyway, yes.
It's also a good deal of physical effort.
Yes. Yeah, especially if you're doing more than one prostration or you're kind of infirm. Marshall, are you keeping your hand up or?
I forgot again.
What? Okay.
Yeah, I have to turn it off after I do it. Sorry.
Okay. We're gonna finish out. We're gonna finish the Gospel of Matthew chapter 15 today. So we're plowing bravely ahead.
Are you sure?
So, but notice there was a process here. Notice there was a development. Jesus was silent to her. Jesus insults her. He's trying to get her to a point. So his tests of her he was trying to cultivate her. And I think that this is you know, a micro example of what the spiritual life is supposed to look like. The silence of God, the challenges we get from God are supposed to are supposed to be a process that shape us to the point where we're having that humility at the end. So it's not that God is just being arbitrary, but he's doing something to us even in his silence. I think that's very interesting. We should view our own spiritual struggles in the same way. And she did not just walk up to him and say, "Hey, I'm a little dog, you're my master, please give me a crumb." He had to coax it out of her by his silence, by his insult to her. And then she became the person he wanted her to be. It's the same thing with us. We can walk up to God and say, "Lord Jesus, I'm the worst of all sinners. I don't deserve anything. Now, please, here's my list." We have that. There's this one, kind of nutty priest on the internet, but I very much like him. Father Cosmas is Australian. He calls it skuliki syndrome, because a skuliki in Greek is a worm. And he says it's skuliki syndrome when you're like, "Oh, I'm a worm. I'm the lowest of sinners. I'm the worst. Woe is me." But in actual practice, you're not actually. It sounds funny, but I've dealt with people like that, and it's actually the most maddening thing in the world. They put on this show of like piety, like, "Oh, I'm the most terrible person ever." But in reality, they just live like everyone else. They just make a show of it. It's don't do that. Have humility that's genuine. Yes.
You were talking about how like sometimes God is just silent.
Yeah.
How do we like deal with the fact that we're supposed to be like completely reliant on God, and then he just takes himself away, and we are just kind of like, okay, so now I got to be relying on me. But we're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're reliant on God right now, for the air you breathe, for the fact that you don't have terminal cancer, for the fact that, you didn't get hit by a bus coming here. So no, at no point has God ever truly been absent. He just, his absent, he is apparently absent, but not ever actually absent. In the Orthodox Church, we consider, in general, the things that happen to us without our asking for them as sent by God. So the people who walk into our life, and especially you should have that attitude when, if you're dealing with someone you don't like. You say, "Well, God put this person in front of me to deal with, so I have to accept that." So no, you're still relying on God at all points, and so you should open up. I don't feel God. It doesn't make sense to me that God is present, but I have to accept that I am relying on God even at this moment. Yes.
Remember Job and Esther. Just put yourself in. You're a Job or you're an Esther. Just keep it trooping. He's there. He's just not showing himself at the moment.
Good. So her humility is called faith because the two are deeply intertwined. The nullification of Gentile separation follows nullification of the food law. Oh gosh, we're not going to finish the chapter tonight, are we? Okay. We're about to get in the weeds. So earlier in chapter 15, the previous lessons that we've done, Jesus nullified the food law. He says it's not about washing your hands and eating unclean food. And then after that, he opened up his ministry to the Gentiles. That pretty much exact sequence happens in Acts chapter 10, verse 9. And in fact, they're linked by the same vocabulary. Remember, I told you the word, it's a throwback to our previous class. I told you that the word Jesus uses for defile in earlier in Matthew chapter 15, it's not the same word as unclean. It's not the word that's used throughout the Old Testament. It's a different one, and it's one that says makes common, or to make common. That shows up very rarely in the Bible, but it shows up in Peter's vision. So this is after Cornelius. Cornelius is the first Gentile who gets called to faith in Christ. This is after Jesus' ascension. The next day this is Peter's vision. The next day, as they went up on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven open and an object like a great sheet bound at the 4 corners, descending to him and let down to the earth. In it were all kinds of 4-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And a voice came to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." There's that word, common. It shows up nowhere else, very few other places in the Bible in relation to food, but it shows up here in Acts chapter 10. And a voice spoke to him again the second time, "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." This was done 3 times, and the object was taken up into heaven again. Now, while Peter wondered within himself what this vision which he had seen meant, behold, the men who had been sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate. And they called and asked whether Simon, whose surname was Peter, was lodging there. While Peter thought about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Behold, 3 men are seeking you. Arise, therefore, go down and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them." Then Peter went down to the men who had been sent to him from Cornelius and said, "Yes, I am him who you seek. For what reason have you come?" And they said, "Cornelius the centurion, a just man, one who fears God and has a good reputation among all the nation of the Jews, was divinely instructed by a holy angel to summon you to his house to hear the words from you." Then he invited them in and lodged them. And on the next day, Peter went away with them, and some brethren from Joppa accompanied him. So it proceeds from there. But basically what's going on is, in this chapter, Acts 10, it makes a very close connection. Actually, it says it more specifically later on in the chapter. A close connection between the food laws no longer apply, and now the Gentiles are welcome into the covenant. The food laws are no longer applied. The Gentiles, what does it mean? It means pork is, pork, all that stuff is no longer unclean. Gentiles are no longer unclean. There's a movement of connecting the food laws to the covenant and the people of God. And that's the exact same moment. That's the exact same movement we just saw here in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 15. First, Jesus abolishes the food law. Then he opens up the covenant to the Gentiles. Exact same thing we just saw in Acts chapter 10. First, God shows Peter a vision saying the food laws are abolished, then immediately directs him to accept these Gentiles into the covenant. There's a connection here, and a very fascinating thematic connection. It's made more fascinating by the fact that Acts and Matthew are written by 2 different authors. And yet they're still speaking, written around the same time by 2 different authors. Who knows if they were sharing notes or whatever. But again, it just shows the mind behind the Bible, because it's something very subtle, but it's very real. There's a movement from the abolition of the old food laws to opening up the covenants to the Gentiles. Pigs are no longer unclean. Gentiles are no longer unclean. Dogs are no longer unclean. Non-Jews are no longer unclean. This is part of God. And it's nice when different things from different sources point in the same direction, because it means they're revealing the same reality, right? Something changed in history around 33 AD. Reality changed. Pigs were bad. Now they're not anymore. My ancestors were bad. Now they're not, kind of joking, but not fully. And they were, and they were liberated. The ancient Greeks were liberated from their paganism. But anyway, it's just very interesting. You get these little, for lack of a better term, have a good night, Noah. But you get these little, for lack of a better term, Easter eggs throughout the Bible. These 2 random passages are connected only by one word, the word kinon, common, in relation to food. But then it expands to, actually, there's a much bigger logical context there. That's really neat. That's really neat. So the movement of the abolition of the food laws and the opening of the covenant to the Gentiles. And by the way, that's what, if people ask you, this used to be a talking point back in like 2008, when the new atheism was really big. When I was a teenager, it was like, oh, you believe in the Bible. Well, how come you eat shellfish? How come you eat pork? And it's like, bro, read Acts 10. It's like it's explained like clearly and directly, but people are stupid. So anyway, may the Lord have mercy on them and illumine them. But people can be ridiculous. Okay, only one last thing I want to comment, which is that Jesus says to her, "Let it be as you desire." Let it be as you desire. That's a really interesting statement. Why? Well, because we're always talking about God's will. Let God's will be done. Let thy kingdom come, thy will be done. We want God's will to be done. And Jesus is saying, let your will be done. That's a bit of a strange statement. I remember the first time I was challenged by this. I was told by a holy monk, someone who I believe is genuinely holy. He said, if you're obedient to God, God's obedient to you. I said, wow, that sounds like almost like blasphemy. Can you really say that? If you're obedient to God, if you do God's will, God does your will. But then I found out later that it actually says this in the Psalm 144, verse 19. He shall do the will of those who fear him. He shall do the will of those who fear them. You want God to do your will, do his will, and he will do your will. I mean, this is really what, I mean, Christ talks about us reigning with him, getting in a certain sense, an equal status with him. And that's why, the great saints of the church throughout history were able to, at least in certain places at certain times, they were able to heal on command, or they were able to do these great things because they were obedient to God. God was obedient to them. That's a crazy thing. That's kind of a wild statement, but really fascinating.
That really shows Christ's humility in that too. But I mean, because
he lowers himself to doing the will of his own creatures. Wow.
And also this is like kind of showing the this woman in the process of theosis, right? Because she has to humble herself, display humility, and then her will is aligning with God's will in this way. So it's like,
that's interesting.
Yeah,
she had to get to that point of humility, and then their wills aligned. Wow. Yeah. And yes, Esther, you had to say something.
I just learned on at least 3 different occasions, even after beheading, 3 different saints picked up their heads and walked to the places they wanted to be buried. Like, if we're willing to do what God wants us to that
That's
extent,
amazing.
we can even be buried where we want to after being martyred.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Would it not come full circle? So if you're infatuated with doing the will of God, then your will will become more aligned with his. So kind of just
and there's a big dimension of that too, which is that at one point it's not like we say God does your will, but it's not like he does your will that's contrary to his. It's just that you're so close together, your will is one.
This is like the Father doing the will of Christ. It's
Yeah.
the same vibe. Yeah.
And you're so perfectly in sync with each other. I can think almost an analogy in my marriage, at least, on a good day, we, it's not, do we do what I want to do? Do you do it? You want to do? But on a good day, we're really in sync with each other, and we're, we see things the same, and we want to do the same things. And why? Because we love each other, and we're very close, and we've built a life together, and that's hopefully going to be our relationship with Christ, as his collective bride. Yes.
Is it also that like Christ wants what's good for you, and you like have to trust him in that?
Yeah.
Or like, I don't know. I guess like my thought is like, is that always true? Is God always going to lead you into what's good for you, or will he sometimes like sacrifice you for others?
Not necessarily everybody.
Yeah, Jackson said it right. God wants what's good. God wants your highest good.
Okay.
And he wants everybody's highest good. That doesn't necessarily seem what's good for you right now.
We have martyrs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for sure, that's really, one thing, I think you're digging a little bit. It's like the ultimate philosophical question, which is, what do we want and why? I'm going a little outside of orthodoxy, but Thomas Aquinas of the Catholic Church was the great philosopher. He said that a human being who has perfect knowledge and perfect desire will only ever want God's will by default. Who will only ever want what's good by default. The only reason we ever want anything contrary to God's will is because we have imperfect desires, because we have imperfect knowledge. Oftentimes, we just don't know what's best. But if we could see everything, we'd know that something else is best. And I think that makes a lot of that perspective makes a lot of sense to me. That we would all really want the same things.
Well, yeah, perfect knowledge is a trait of God.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, again, you're getting closer to who God is in that
in
way.
order to desire rightly, you need to be more like God. That's
like, of course, I guess you would want. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. It all just kind of lines up because we want, all human beings by default want good. No one wants anything bad unless we think we'll get a good out of it. But yes, Esther.
Our most knowledgeable people are Christians because they eventually reach a point where they're like, actually, these guys are onto something, or finally hit, nobody could have created this, but.
Yeah, I think that's true. A lot of, certainly not every so-called great thinker in history was a Christian, but a lot of a lot of people, even who didn't start as Christians, kind of stumbled to Christianity or something like Christianity through the back door, for various reasons. Sometimes it's because of creation itself. Sometimes it's just the insight of Christianity. There's a famous, she's been like making the rounds on like podcasts and YouTubes and stuff. She was a big feminist writer named Louise Perry, who I think she has some really interesting things to say. She converted to Christianity relatively recently, but she said, I first became a Christian because it was sociologically true. She saw it had good insights into human nature, and her thing was specifically about sexuality. That she realized that the whole Christian ideal of one man, one woman for life was, best for people psychologically, it's best for society, it's best for everything. She said, okay, well, because she realized that was actually a really profound insight, because then it must have more going on. So a lot of people, I think it's just to your point that a lot of very smart people reason their way to Christianity through the back door. They see something that makes a lot of sense to them, and it opens up to like, oh no, there's a whole lot more that I didn't catch before.
There was a scientist, I forgot what he was working on specifically, but he was not Christian at all. I believe he was Korean. I'm not really too sure what the main paganism in Korea is, but I'm pretty sure he was either Korean or Chinese, but he was one of the two. And he was talking with his peers. He had finally hit a point where he was like, I can't figure out why this works, because it shouldn't, but it does, and it works perfectly, and if you mess with it, everything is gone. And they were like, well, that's God. And he was like, what do you mean?
Interesting.
And then he dug into the scriptures and everything, and now he's a very devout Christian of some denomination, but even like Einstein, I think, was not originally Christian and eventually became Christian along
Einstein was
the way.
never a Christian, but he
Was
did believe in some kind of
It was somebody who
transcendent
was
God.
very, very intelligent.
Isaac Newton.
Yeah. Anyway, there are a lot of examples throughout history,
Yeah.
but yeah.
That guy was crazy.
Yeah. Isaac Newton was very Christian, also I think rather heterodox too, but anyway.
I don't think Tesla was.
Tesla it was another one, and he was actually, son of a priest, I think, but he was not a Christian, but he had some interesting spiritual ideas.
He was a vegan before it was cool.
He was a vegan. Anyway, he also just seemed like he was a very odd guy. Yeah. Like he was maybe, we would have diagnosed him with something if he lived 100 years later.
Wasn't a fan of the Jews either.
Well, all right. Well, I don't know where that came from, but we'll know. Okay. All right. Lord, now let your servant depart in peace, according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a life for revelation to the Gentiles and glory for your people Israel. Amen. God bless you. Okay. Have a good night, guys.
You just got our YouTube channel demonetized, man.